Hello, good morning. Welcome to this Buzzacott digital and cybersecurity update for memberships and other organisations. In fact, cybersecurity is across all organisations, so we're not going to really focus too much on that, but we will pull out a few different things. Good morning, I'm David. I'm delighted to be with you. We've got now today, it's a Teams event. I normally like to pace the room and run these as a bit of an interactive workshop, but there's quite a lot of you coming on already. So the plan is, if that's okay, is that I can go through the slides fairly rapid pace. Don't worry about taking notes. These will be forwarded to you along with anything else tomorrow or the next day. So don't worry about that. Just if you can just maybe listen to the concepts. The plan is if you can raise any questions in the chat box. One of my trusty colleagues is going to feed these forward to me, and we'll try and answer them, leave some time to answer them at the end. But if we don't answer them at the end, I promise you we'll put some kind of something out to you following the missing. So we're going to be together. Those of you who are new to us, we are a top 20 accountancy firm. We're in our 102nd year, so we've been around a while. We're based in one location in London. We've got operations in kind of Hong Kong and India, just in case we need to cover those jurisdictions. It's a lovely sunny day here in London, and it's quite a pleasure to be in. And as I say, I'm delighted to virtually meet you. I'm not going to go through my bio because I trust you can all read stuff on our website and things about me. What can you expect today? It's a webinar on digital and cyber security for membership and associated organisations, but it really holds, as I said before, for other organisations, and we've skewed our approach to include those organisations which may have members and which may have other stakeholders, partnerships and that sort of stuff. Some of what we may discuss may initially feel a little disconcerting, but I think it's beholden on me to arm you with the bad stuff and then come up with the kind of plans to deal with it. So what can we expect now there together? So I'm going to touch the cyber landscape. It's been a big year, 2021. Where the attacks are coming from, they're called attack vectors. How do you protect yourself in an online world? We've had massive amount of transformation over a couple of years, so I'll be covering that. And then if we move on to the next slide, let's talk about the new normal a little bit. This is the world landscape and how it impacts us. I think it's fair to say, I know we're 2 years into the pandemic now, but I think a lot of it still holds true. We had 2 years of digital transformation in about 2 weeks just before we locked down, and we're gradually coming out of that. Some of you may be back. Some of you have made permanent changes to how you do your business. I think there was an immediate test of our business continuity plans. So when we all have to answer that question, when did you last test your business continuity plans? Well, in March of 2020. I think it's fair to say that pandemics usually feature very low on our risk registers. Who saw that coming? Those of us in London pandemic, who would have thought we might all be locked down and not working in our normal place of work, and the issues about resources rather than kind of getting to technology. And I think we've all had to review our focus from business as usual. Now that we're coming back and this becomes a little bit of the new normal, it seems to be permanent, the hybrid working, and the choice of people wanting to be when and where they want to be. I think we need to for cyber security professionals, we've had a double-edged sword. Firstly was actually how do we get people working during the pandemic, and then as they come out of it, how do we secure people in a hybrid environment, because it's different to what we knew before. I think we need to review our policies, particularly around the home working and behaviours when working remotely. People tend to act differently at home than they do in the office. And I think the acknowledgement that we all have to have is that our perimeters are not as controlled as perhaps they were before. We don't have as much control, as much impact. Before it used to be a desktop in the office and the network was in the office. Now it's without the office amongst all of our membership. And I think we need to keep our stakeholders, our members, safe. I think they expect from us the same attention as they get in their personal life. Perhaps we may have a lesser budget, and there may be criticism if that budget is applied to security rather than mission. So I think, as we come back, we need to keep people staked. And I think it's clear that last year, the majority of breaches were what's called insider threats, whether that be accidental or malicious, tends to be more accidentally. So the key thing is the education of our people, and the ways that we can, the different channels that we can educate them. And I think the expectation as we go through the generational shift is becoming greater on hers to adapt to this way of working. Just a few things at work. We've collaboration challenges, supervision challenges. We've got people working in circumstances where there are error and uncertainty. We've gone away from what's called the 4-eye checking, the closer supervision. So we have to find a way of managing both security and our people in different ways. And our stakeholders want to engage with us in ways that are familiar to our personal life. So those of you who are member organisations, they're going to want an Amazon or an Apple-like experience in engaging with you. And I think I've alluded to before, I think people have had a more relaxed home mindset when it comes to attacks. People are sharing machines, they're not as private as maybe they used to be. And for those of you with budget constraints, you've probably accepted people to bring their own disaster or bring your own device. Work boundaries are extending to the home, and we as leaders need to understand that that's not only security, it's also privacy. So, what are our protocols around leaving documents around that kids and husbands, wives can see, partners can see. We've seen an attack based on COVID. COVID thematically seem to make up a lot of the responses. Have you been tested? And it's phishing. I have to say that the ideal world for any kind of technology team is to nobody switch on a machine or attach a device. Unfortunately, we're not in that environment, so let's move on. We're going to call to demand. We'll come on to later, but we have the Internet of Things, which is network devices, whether that's Ring doorbells, baby monitors, fridges, and everything that are on our home networks that come in, that access work-based information. We've got a number of new applications. We've all seen the rise in things like Zoom. We can't cope without Zoom and Teams now. Initially, there was the Zoom bombing of until Zoom caught up with security protocols. And it's unfortunate. I think personal devices, we need to educate our people that personal devices need to have the same level of hygiene and protection as corporate ones. Home devices are twice as more likely to be attacked than corporate ones. Although some positive news that the UK is currently at the bottom of the infection rate. And what we have seen is a growth in shadow OT. If you're not going to give me the tool how to do it, I'm going to find something how to do my job in the way to go. When that's visible and people are visible doing that, it's easy to see as one walks around. But when people are in the home offices, they'll find ways of working around. Our rules and policies have to be something that empowers somebody to do the job, because if you don't empower somebody to do the job and give them the right tools, they'll find a way around it. Okay, next slide, please. I'm going to cover that. Next slide, please. Sorry. Ahead of myself. We're talking about the hyper-connected world. The Internet of Things. We're all living at home. We're all spending our money not on holidays. We're spending on devices, on things at home. A new Ring doorbell, fridge, gaming machine, everything else. What we need to understand is they're actually connected to the internet in some way. Unfortunately, the old adage of buy cheap, buy twice kind of attracts to these things, because some of the more popular devices that you see on Amazon, the cheaper devices that people have lumped into, don't have the level of development and kind of security protocols that we expect them to have, because they're produced cheaply and they're produced to a budget. So we really need to think about how we're doing that. We've heard stories of people being groomed and passwords being focused on through webcams and doorbells and baby monitors. There was some horrible stories about people being groomed through hacked baby monitors, and we've quite necessarily educated and entertained our people in online communities. They wouldn't have survived without we wouldn't have got the education that we needed to have if we didn't find ways of educating them, and we need the same level of security. And of course, if you believe the conspiracy theorists that we're all being listened to, I think perhaps the fact is we are in some kind of way. We need to understand the connections and the incentives that are out there that are really not for our benefit. Facebook is a free piece of application. It's not really free, because what they really want is to commoditize the data. And that's the real money. The advertising is the real money. Us using it to post kind of photos of our lunch is not really valuable. I just reflect back on Cambridge Analytica and the way that they were able to skew voting behaviours, if you believe all that's said, with access to data. And I have to ask you the question: how often are you taken by surprise that you're on Facebook or Instagram and an advert pops up, something you might have been talking about or searching back elsewhere? We need to understand that it's not that whether or not we're being listened to or things are happening. Things are happening. We just need to be able to deal with it and secure ourselves with it. Okay, moving on to the next slide. An Internet Minute. I like to watch the evolution of this slide. I've been doing this for a number of years, and this slide is all out there for a kind of every year for about the past 5 or 6 years. And it's good to hear, and it's good to armor how things are changing. I mean, who'd heard of TikTok 2 years ago? And I have to say, it's a Chinese entity, or was a Chinese entity. So within the last year or so, it's becoming one of the prevalent ways of transmitting information and data and reaching us. Not the older generation like me, but certainly the younger generation are engaged with it massively. So let's move on to the next slide. And next time we're going to talk about the attack vector, so everybody's informed where it's coming from. So I use this kind of set this in perspective. Organized crime, it is one of the most prevalent, cheap, lucrative, very organized. A criminal can throw a multiple attack using a network of computers or bots. We've seen that money being used to fund, I'll come on state in a minute, but it's been fund organised crime, it's drugs, people trafficking. We've seen a massive, over the last year, rising phishing, whale phishing, and COVID thing attack. Social media profiling. They're almost like detectives. They know where people who really want your data know where you've been. They're watching all of the platforms, whether that's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and putting together a profile of you, because let's face it, they have to win once to get a reasonable amount of you. We have to win every time. It preys on a lack of knowledge and gullibility. Tools that help them, things like we've spoken for, Facebook and Twitter location services. What's happened in the last 12 months? Well, it's good to see. We've had Log4j, which you may think actually big firms, that sort of stuff, but it's chances are that a lot of your outsourced supply chain may have been using some of the Log4j programs with it in providing support. So your outsourced technologies provider may have been using this, and it's good to ask the question, well, what do you know about this? Or if they're really good, they would have come to you and said, yeah, we know about this and we fixed it. We've seen supply chain extortion with the colonial oil pipeline. We're seeing a cloud first approach to everything. And we've seen this development over the last 12 months of triple and perhaps quadruple threat phishing. So a triple threat phish is that they send you an email, you click on it, and they hold you to ransom. The double is they do that, but they also say, we've got your data, and it's blackmail. We're going to let it go to the community to show everybody you've been hacked, and they use blackmail. And then the triple and quadruple is that having done either of those above, they put pressure on your supply chain, your supply partners, if you're reliant on a particular partner, or they know if they've got information, they put pressure on your staff, on your people, to kind of encourage ransom. So that's been the development over the last year as protection techniques have got better. I mean, it's fair to say that the dark web contains resources for the unscrupulous. You can buy batches of compromised email addresses for as little as 50 cents for 1,000 addresses. There's also what's called phishing as a service. There is a ransomware outfit that are selling you a kit that you can buy on dark web, and they take a percentage and a fee for the kit. So, okay, moving on to the next slide. So the other attack vector that we're seeing quite a lot of, we are seeing state-sponsored activity. It's fair to see the Chinese army has got a whole division focused on cyber warfare, and not focused on armed forces. We saw it with WannaCry. We saw it a little bit with the Colorado Colonial Pipeline. We're seeing more infrastructure state crime, state-sponsored. North Korea is widely seen as the architect of the WannaCry that took down hospitals and local authorities. And it's fair to say the tensions in Ukraine with Russia are going to exacerbate this kind of activity. I don't want to talk about the doomsday clock, but I'm rather concerned that we're going to see an uptick. We've come out of Europe and all of the kind of spoofs and supply chain attacks that we've seen of that. And of course, we are due a general election. It may be sooner than we think. And we've got the political tensions that we're all seeing in the UK. I'm apolitical, but that's where we are. Next slide, please. So historically, I suppose activists, the romantic view of the spotty teenage hacker, but it's not. It tends to be state-sponsored and organised crime. However, that said, it long thought that the spotty teenager often thought to have disappeared. Actually, the talk attack a few years ago was from an Irish bedroom by a 14-year-old, from what I believe. On to the next ones. Activists, we've seen a resurgence of a little bit of civil disruption. Fortunately, over the last few years, I think people like Anonymous have skewed their approach, attacking the war on terror, so ISIS. But with the emergence of more governmental control, we can expect disruption to come through. So just a quick word on regulation, just so that we're all aware. We have a new information commissioner in the UK. He's a guy called John Edwards, and he's from New Zealand. You may recall that Elizabeth Denham, the previous retiring information commissioner, came from Canada. In my view, was quite an effective information commissioner. But I suppose what we have to expect is there going to be a new broom? Are we going to have to be much more hygienic and protected than perhaps hitherto? The other thing is there's been a new cyber essentials regime from January 22. Any of you who are thinking of cyber essentials, or at least thinking of looking at it in terms of trying to protect yourself, that was updated from Jan this year, and it's bringing cloud operations and remote working more into focus. You've often been able to scope home workers out, but I'm afraid you can't scope home workers out anymore. And we've got the long-awaited PECA, which kind of keeps rising and coming. Okay, next slide. I think really, if I'm a leader of an organization, my top 5 questions are these ones. Where's our data? Have we got an inventory? It's really important perhaps for membership organizations, because you perhaps outsource your membership stakeholder. You're still responsible for that security, but we maybe outsource the tools. Unfortunately, all computer is historic language, so it will need a configuration setting. Do you know what configuration settings have been set on your data? Who's allowed to get into it? Who isn't allowed to? Now, that's a question as a leader of an organization, you need to ask the question. We outsource event management. Eventbrite historically, I think, was hosted in America. So, there's potentially a GDPR cyber security issue there. Stakeholders expect that kind of experience that they get in their, then, you know, it's fair to say technology has really helped in that you can create Teams rooms and communities amongst your stakeholders, common interest groups. And I have to say, one of the things I love about technology is that the ability to constantly push the boundaries. Having said that, we can't protect it if we don't know where it is. We've had the British Council students had a recent data breach using third-party software, thousands of stuff, you know, and your stakeholders have say, you know, the responsibility will be looking to you. Legally, you're the kind of data controller, and it's the balance of joining it all together and segregating the information. You know, if I wouldn't segregate, I would definitely segregate. I wouldn't have your member data in the same place that I have your organization data. You know, that's one simple segregation that you can do to stop the flow. So it's about understanding the boundaries. You know, the collective responsibilities. Do we understand? Do your board understand collective data? It's not a technology problem. It's a board problem. Does the board or someone within the membership have a specialist non-executive director or someone with a passion for cyber and digital? Are they listened to? Is it discussed? I say cyber should be high up on the risk register. You know, are there awareness of the risk challenges and the reputational impact of the attack? You know, have we rehearsed our technology recover? Have we rehearsed things like our PR plan, negotiation? Where would we go for help? You know, we can do a tabletop exercise around that. What would happen if you couldn't pay your people or your suppliers? That's likely to happen. There's some questions about what's our, you know, rather, let's get the argument, let's get the discussion up front of something happen. It's not if it happens, when it happens. Let's have the discussion. Are we going to pay a ransom if we get phished or not? You know, what is our collective opinion of that? Let's listen to each other to determine. In some stages, you may not be able to pay a ransom because it's organised crime and it's against OFAC requirements. You know, are we doing the basics right? You know, I have a member of my organisation who we call the toddler because he asked the question that everybody thinks has been answered, but really hasn't. You know, are we doing the basics right? Are we securing the perimeters? Are we using multi-factor authentication? Where's our data? Who's controlling it? Who's responsible? You know, and getting ahead of that discussion. And are we investing enough? Because if you think you're investing enough, you're probably not. And unfortunately, it changes by the day. I can't really give you a benchmark because it depends on how you operate, how things are structured. It probably needs to be increased. You know, it's fair to say older organizations, factories ran on oil and manual workers. Current information organizations run on data and technology, and without it, really isn't a business. Okay, on to the next slide, please. I've been a little bit gloomy so far and scary. I hope that hasn't driven you away so far. We've got half an hour. So that's the kind of landscape in which we're all businesses. I don't think any of that will come as a surprise. Let's kind of move on and think about how we need to have the mindset of pulling things together. I like to call it the cyber trinity. It's you know, it's not the Holy Spirit and God and Jesus. It's kind of it's people, process, and technology. So let's have a little look through how we go there. So if we move on. So people and stakeholder consideration, you know, I've said it before, it needs board level sponsorship. The tech people, the protection people need a seat at the table and need to be listened to. You need to, the Diligent recent report in January 22, businesses lost around about 374 million during the pandemic, mainly due to people working at home. And as I say, that could be a blend. One likes to trust your people, but, you know, most of it is accidentally, but statistically, any organization is going to have a community of thieves, kind of criminals, drug addicts, alcoholics. You know, it's just statistic. That's the demographics in which we are in. You know, cyber protection historically was thought of as the problem of the tech team, but I kind of said at cyber security, it's all three. It's not just the tech, it's everybody across the board. And I think the expectation is that you train your people regularly when they come into your organization, when they leave your organization, and while they're with you, and with different channels and awareness campaigns. There are lots of collateral out there, free collateral with the NCSC. There's videos, there's a multitude of stuff that we can push out for free, but somebody needs to do that. that education needs to kind of run through, almost be a matter of course, that people take the thought process that actually is what I'm doing going to cause a risk. That's how you protect yourself. In historically, it tends to be the senior people and cyber experts who fall for a phishing attack, a fake, white hat phishing attack, or the junior people who are so pressed that don't have time to think about it. I think the other thing that was interesting to me, that when you're kind of conducting training and perhaps phishing attacks, white hat phishing attacks, is the multicultural community. It's probably fair to say in your organization, if it's a membership organization, you would have members from right across the board. How does the messaging land for a multicultural, multilingual society? What works in the UK may not work in America, Australia, or Japan, and it's highly likely you've got members across there. Phishing really is big, and in my view, it's one of the main attack vectors. If we look at those phishing, Facebook and Microsoft are the most important impersonated organizations. So what would you do if you got an email from those two and it was fake? And it's then followed by Apple, Google, PayPal and Dropbox. I'm not a fan of Dropbox, but if it's handled properly, you can use it properly, but there seems to be some caution on that. If we move on to the next slide, please. Why do breaches happen? So, as we said, the end user the quick 2-click, didn't think about it, didn't think it was fake, think I'm going to get something out of it, I'm going to get something for nothing. We ran a white hat phishing with a free £20 Amazon voucher. There was no Amazon voucher, and amazing how many people clicked on that. Weak default passwords. Little word about passwords. There are two kind of thoughts in the community about passwords. There is one view that says you should change them regularly and be complex. There's an emerging view, especially with the National Cybersecurity Centre that leads a lot of our thought, is actually a really strong long password that doesn't change is likely to give better health, and especially if that's backed up with a secure configuration like multi-factor authentication, all those sort of stuff. We've all got, we're all using Office 365. There's loads of stuff we can do with that. We'll come back onto that in a minute. But these are the 5 causes of breach. The reason why the patches drop from Microsoft is because they're important. They need to happen. So what process do you have in place to roll those out? And I'm afraid the answer, well, we just leave it to our tech support. I love a lot. There are a lot of really brilliant tech support businesses out there, either internal or external. But it's fair to say that a lot of the profit is burnt up in the first kind of 6 months of the relationship with you. You get a lot of love at the start of the relationship. I'm not so sure you get the same amount of love as you carry on. So I think you've got to, as the leaders of organization, you've got to ask these questions, and segmentation is one of the, segmentation I alluded to earlier, which is, make sure your data is segmented so that the offices, the offices of the kingdom, the keys to the kingdom are not in the same place as the lower value membership information or the higher transactional stuff. Your real safe stuff, put that somewhere else. Okay, moving on to the next question. So let's look at technology. We're all been using Office 365. I have to say I'm a huge fan of the inbuilt things that are in there. Things like data loss prevention, multi-factor authentication. You've got things like there are tools within your Microsoft and Office 365 settings that you need to understand your community, but you can immediately get some quick wins by rolling out impossible travel. So if I log in London and I log in Edinburgh, that's impossible travel. I can't get between London and Edinburgh in 2 minutes. Therefore, it will block one or both of those settings. The geography, if you only have members or stakeholders or do business in the UK, then restrict your environment to only accept requests from the UK. The technology is efficient enough to know where a request is coming from, so you can rule out an IP address. I spoke about passwords and patch management. How do you build your machines? How do you roll them out to people? On your cloud solutions, single sign-on, multi-factor authentication is the norm now. We get it from our banks, we get it from Facebook, we get it from Amazon. Why aren't we putting it in our organization? And if we can't put it in, what are we doing to de-risk the kind of situation? Okay, moving on. So that's the kind of stakeholder. The other part of one of the other parts of the Trinity after people and technology is processes. Do your people understand what is expected from them? Have we given them very clear, easy to read kind of behavior guides, actually what's expected of them? What's your information security policy? Do you roll out continual professional development? Do you look at how are people trained, and do you have a focus on it? Have a look at your starter and induction processes. Starter process ought to have at least a sign off against the information security policy, or some kind. We train people on health and safety and GDPR. I'm not so sure we always train them on things like cybersecurity. So a lot of great free resources out there. The other thing is, what do you do when someone leaves? How long is it when someone leaves before their system is shut down, their access is changed? It should be an immediate, and that should be your HR people talking to your technology people to put this in place and automate it, so that if somebody's leaving date is known, that they're automatically barred from that point onwards. I think one of the other thing, we've spoken about business continuity. It's a little bit old hat. We still need to know it's going to happen. How do we recover from an attack? But also think rehearsal. Let's not get these discussions done when we're stressed and when we're under attack and everybody's shouting at us to get back to work. Let's do it, and let's have, I'm not a huge fan of a business continuity manual that goes on the shelf and then is dusty within a week, but you need to have parameters and need to have, who's going to give the statement to the press? How are you going to liaise with your stakeholders? What happens if you can't pay your staff? Have you got funding elsewhere? Although we've come out of the EU and GDPR from a European standpoint has gone down, we've a lot of that came from us anyway, and we've almost replicated it in the UK. And I think we spoke about data loss prevention. There's a lot of tools. One of your people starts emailing the whole of your Salesforce kind of client list to themselves, sorry, in Hotmail. You can stop that happening. There is size limits and stuff like that. I know it's always a balance between allowing people to do the work, trusting them, but let's plan for the worst but hope for the best. Next slide. Moving on, remote home working, it's a little bit old now, but we've spoken about risky behavior devices. Do your people know whether they're allowed to access your corporate information on their personal phones, on their personal tablets, on personal tablets? If they do you have a protocol like multi-factor authentication that distinguishes between it's a device that that you manage, that you've updated? So at home, I could access the firm's information on my firm provided Surface or laptop. I know that's updated, that's patched, that's controlled. If I try and get in from somewhere else, then it restricts my ability to do certain things, and I have to use things like multi-factor authentication. We've seen the growth of, do our people know what our policy is? Have our people changed their router password? How do you know that they've changed their router password? It's fair to say working environments, we've been working in kitchens, we've been working in bedrooms, some of us got offices. Who do we know who's watching us at the same time? Who do we know who can see our screen? Have we invested in confidentiality screens and this sort of stuff? What is our strategy to protect home working? As we're coming back, we need to think about protecting both those people in the office, because during the pandemic we had to access social distancing, to keep doors open, windows open. Is that still appropriate as we come back? Probably not. Have we given our people tips on how to do video conferences? Have we engaged with them in terms of protecting you against the threat? Moving on to the next slide, thank you. Okay. A little bit when we come back, we seem to be coming through the pandemic. We are going to be in a hybrid future model. We need to review our policies. We need to look at our security update. We need to look at our bring your own disaster device policy. And I think there's been a certain amount of operational changes on how we do. I think it's time to review what lessons we learned on the lockdown, whether, I know we've been doing it as we go along, but is it time to have a business continuity review, an insurance review, maybe a focus on our risk readiness and how we're governance? I have to say that but if you make a report to the Information Commissioner that is a reportable breach, one of the questions they ask you is, has the person who made the breach been trained in the last 2 years? Firstly, have they? Secondly, how do we know that they have? And did it land? I really would recommend some incident response and training, PR training on the people who will be in front of the press. We think about how badly the BP Halliwell oil was handled. Those people weren't trained. We're going towards more activity-based working. We're in London, and probably London is a day destination, but there are organisations where someone will pop into the office and they might have some lunch, do some training, do some work, and then they'll go home again, especially the more regional. How are you set up for activity-based working? Are you properly set up to collaborate? Do you have the tools available? Moving on. Okay. That's really kind of, just to conclude the previous section, really about leadership in terms of cyber protection. I think it's being the toddler, asking the question, and thinking about what could go wrong. Loads of things are going right, and the fact that we're all still in business is brilliant. But it's asking those questions, and I'm afraid, I think I talked to quite a few kind of chief execs and trustees of organisations. They say, well, the IT team handle that, or it's handled by our outsourced brand. You need to go that step forward. It's asking those questions of your outsourced IT provider. How do they protect your data? Because you have the ultimate responsibility. Okay, let's move on. We've got about 10 minutes left. Sorry, can we go back? Thank you. Sorry, misword from I wanted to move on from the subject. The 7 lenses of so this is digital leadership. I'm quite passionate about digital transformation and about digital leadership. I've spent some time studying about it. I think we've got the 7 lenses of how we look at this. The digital imperative and digital leadership is that our stakeholders are changing, their behaviours and needs are constantly evolving. They expect us in a corporate organizational world to have the same tools and experience they do in their private world. I think we have some digital channels to market. We have the opportunity to touch our stakeholders in more ways than perhaps we would. We've got data locked up in disparate unconnected systems. It really is a missed opportunity. How often do you say, well, this campaign master doesn't talk to our management system? We're getting things getting better. Things like Power BI are able to join disparate data and give us the digital story that we're really looking for. I think agility and innovation. Historically, software was developed, whatever you call it, in what's called the waterfall method, in that it was built, it was tested, it was scoped, it was tested again, and then it was finally released to the market, by which time the world had moved on, that software wasn't appropriate, or regulation had moved on, and of course you invested all of that time and money. The base at the moment is what's known as the agile method, and that is you build a small bit, you test what's called minimal viable product. Okay, what's the smallest bit of software product that we can release? We do that, we secure that, we test that and release that earlier on in the project, because then what will happen as you start engaging with your stakeholders, they will tell you how the software needs to evolve. What are the features that I would like to see, and then you build them in. You don't have to go back and test the first initial bit, because that's already been tested. There might be some interface issues. So yeah, I'm a massive disruptor. I like to disrupt everything. So I think we need to disrupt ourselves. So just because we do something in the same way doesn't mean we have to keep on doing it. And we've seen over the last 2 years the emerging technology trends. We're seeing much more people engaging. The high street is closing down. If you think of Black Friday last year, I think for the first time ever, we tipped over to online sales versus in-person sales. Now, it's not to get away from the fact we still need to try things on, look at things, try and test things. But I suspect a lot of us will finish we'll do our research and finish our transaction online. And I think we have to have a digital in all we do mindset. So, if someone comes up with a proposal to do something in person, well, let's think how we can back that up. Retail is a great example of that. Digital, even if you go into something like a Burberry shop in Regent Street, they're trying to skew you towards the digital so that when you go into a Burberry shop somewhere else, they will already know about you. So moving on. So that's about digital leader. Okay, what do I think of the 7, or what does the Association of Digital Leadership really think the 7 priorities as leaders we need to adopt? Well, first of all, we need to look at ourselves from our customer or our stakeholder. What is their experience? All too often, I see websites for professional services firms, lawyers and accountants that are very much about, we're brilliant at that. Well, I kind of take that as a little bit as a given that you're good at what you do, otherwise you wouldn't still be ministers. So therefore, what's in it for me? What is my experience going to feel like? What are my emotions going to be feel like? Moving on, we've got to optimize the digital channels, make it easier for people to do business with it, use kind of portals, digital channels, multiple ways for people to engage you, their preferences. You need to unlock your data. I suspect we've all got loads of data that, how often we've written to someone, the deceased Mr. Smith. Well, the fact is that data is out there and it's available from different sources. Just as by way of an example, we've been doing some stuff recently with the grant making community, with a grant maker's own data, but overlaying that against things like Red Cross data and government Office of Statistics data to see if an organisation really is giving to the most appropriate. So there's a thing called a deprivation index that shows actually if which every postcode has a level of deprivation into it. So we're interested to see whether our clients are giving to the money into the areas of most deprivation in the UK, and that's how you merge those data sources together. We have to innovate, we have to rethink our bundle module, and we have to maximize evolving. We shouldn't be afraid of evolving technology. We should see that as a real opportunity to engage with our people. If we can move to the next slide, please. Okay. You may say, well, that's all very well. You've told us what we do. Well, how do I do it? This is based on what makes a good digital leader. Well, and you can even drop digital. Digital's almost superfluous in this. And what makes a good leader? I think you need to be digital fluent. You need to be curious. You need to think about. You need to understand how your stakeholders engage with you, and therefore how technology can help you. A technique that I've seen used before successfully is what's called an innovation circle. So that's made up of 3 personalities. Doesn't matter about the numbers, but the personalities, you need a subject matter expert, somebody who understands what it is you're trying to do, understands the work, understands how you're trying to deliver. You then need a technologist to understand, well, how does the technology, how is it secured, how is privacy affected? And remember that the law requires you to do a privacy impact assessment before any new project or new activity is taken on. Then you need a project manager to bring that all together. This is how you bring the technologists and the subject matter experts together. I think in the past there's been a little bit of a schism between those two because, well, you don't know how I know. I think there needs to be an understanding that the technologist can understand more of the line of business if they have access to the subject matter. So innovation circles are a great way of doing that. Experimental. Accept it fail. Apple accept that 7 out of every 8 of its projects will fail, and is happy to experiment to fund those in an agile way and managing risk early on. So yeah, let's embrace failure, but let's fail fast and learn quick. If we know we're going to fail, let's find that out quickly without spending too much money, and then move on to something else, or agilely move on to something else. So that's about experimental. If someone comes to you with a project, well, we've never done that before, and it failed, or we tried it before and it failed, why not have a proof of concept? Why not just think about the first thing? And then we said about a digital leader needs to be compliant. We've spoken about that. You need to understand security. You need to understand privacy impact risk assessments. You know, if you're thinking of doing, none of us are sitting here not doing projects at the moment. We're all doing projects. So moving on. So I think that's it. Surgery and questions. I'm going to open up the question thing. So some of the feedback is that, you know, the board level sponsorship, there's a lot of discussions where technology and cybersecurity is right at the bottom of the agenda. I think it needs to be front and center, but it's not as boring. You know, a cyber attack, there is some historical kind of statistics that those organizations that were out of business for 2 days never ever recovered, and it's quite a high percentage. You know, there needs to be it's the one thing that keeps me awake at night, is that a leader needs to understand that, you know, the backups may not work because they may have been infected. Someone may have been in your system for 6 months before they decided to unleash the attack. Therefore, your backup, you know, a lot of people use a 3-2-1 backup. So 3 versions of the backups on 2 devices, one of which is out off-site and not connected to anything else. So it's sanitized. You know, have you asked your technology provider, is the backup sanitized? How can you prove to me a backup is sanitized? Because what you may do is, if you're attacked, we all rely on backups. You go to the backup and then you realize actually you reinfect yourself. Someone asked, should there be a dedicated role of digital director? Yeah, absolutely. Either a board level role or somebody who is passionate and interested. There's no point in, you know, it's the old saying is the volunteer's worth 10 pressed men. It's no good pressing someone to be someone. I think you need to find somebody who is passionate about it, who is well read. Somebody's asked what using VPNs. I think VPNs are great, and especially if they're secured with multi-factor authentication and they're up to date and they're kept up to date for security threats. I think what we're seeing is an evolution of remote access in terms of behavioral based access. So if systems see a behavior that they haven't seen before, they'll automatically quarantine. I mean, that's the other thing on VPNs, on malware protection. Are your settings to automatically quarantine, or is it to warn somebody? So if a piece of virus gets in and your antivirusware protects it, what does it do? Does it just ping an email or a message to your head of IT who may be busy, who may be away on holiday, or is it automatically quarantine? I would suggest that you want to automatically quarantine, because then you shut down what's called lateral movement of it. Okay. Does anyone have any more questions? I've kind of gone through the ones on there. Someone asked me, Office 365, where you are. What if users are using VPNs? Sorry, I misunderstood the question. So if they're cloaking them, I think, you know, we've got to go back to basics. It's got to be multi-factor authentication, and it's got to be a separate device for, you know, it's got to be a mobile phone, a PIN code or a text message, or a code that, you know, you've got to have something that negates that somebody's cloaking where they are. So, you know, back to basics on that one. And someone's change is never easy or comfortable. In inverted commas, we have to embrace change and move with the times, even though it doesn't feel comfortable. It's a very good point. Change is never comfortable, and unfortunately, we've been in organisations that have probably been around quite a while. Can I recommend insurers for a small charity to cover cyber and digital breaches? Cyber insurance 2 or 3 years ago was very, very popular and reasonably accessible. So in terms of premium levels and response to claims, I think the last couple of years have seen, bizarrely, I was talking to an insurance broker yesterday at lunch. They were saying how everybody piled in cyber, now everyone's piling out of it. So I think there's lack of capacity. There's been a lot of claims through cyber attacks, all the stuff that I talked earlier. There are some reasonable ones out there, and if someone wants to make touch with me, I can happy to tell you what we use. I think what it brings, cyber insurance is good so long as it is the keystone. It bridges the gap between other ports of insurance. So there's no doubt some cyber insurance is included in your offices and kind of liability insurance, maybe in your professional indemnity, but we often see that office and property-based insurance relies on a forcible act. Now, I'm not so sure that a cyber attack has been held to be a forcible act. Someone's not broken in and stolen something; they've hacked you. So it gives insurers the opportunity in these times of low profit and low capacity to avoid a claim. So insurance is great. I think more important is, the one thing that I find insurance is really good at is providing you with a negotiator. So if within your policy, not just making good and repudiating the breach and doing the forensics, but actually if if or not you've decided to make a payment on ransomware, there will be a ransom negotiator, and I would suggest you put your trust into them because they are very experienced. A lot of them are MI5 operatives who know who these people are. So that's what I'd say about insurance. Should you buy specific cyber insurance? Kind of covered that. Oh, thank you very much. Great set of messages and well presented. Thank you very much. Unless there's anyone else, we're coming to about 57 minutes now, so I'm happy to close that down unless there's any more questions. Okay. What we'll do is we'll get the slides out to you and put a response to some of these questions so that you've got the collateral. One point out is that one thing that I'm passionate about is keeping an eye on the National Cyber Security Centre, NCSC. I think .org.uk, but if you Google National Cyber, there's some great programs of work in terms of how to protect yourself. But importantly, there is a weekly newswire, and it's a couple of lines just told you what the latest thing is. Unless you're keeping up to date with what's out there, how can you protect yourself against it? So that's my sign-off piece. Keep an eye on the NCSC and what they're doing. Thank you very much, and good morning.